Today's topic for True Crime Files is the Sante Kimes and Kenny Kimes. We call it the mother-son duo. They went from the Pacific Coast to the East Coast, and they did fraud, mayhem, and killings all along the way. Amazing what these two people did. So I just want to mention that we always have a new podcast on Friday at 3 o'clock. But just to make sure that you get the latest one, subscribe. If you hit that subscribe button, you'll be notified when our podcast is ready for viewing. Now, what are the facts in our case today? Let's find out. Well, what's our case about today? The mother-son duo, better known as the Kimes case. Well, it involved a mother by the name of Sante Kimes and her son, Kenny Kimes. And they were very good at committing crime, fraud, as well as murder. And they really got to be well known, and many books were written about them. The son of a grifter, dead end, the mother and son and the socialite, as well as movies were made of the couple. A Little Thing Called Murder. And there was another movie, Like Mother, Like Son. So they got quite a notoriety. And let's start our case out talking about a quitclaim deed that they needed signed by this David KAZDIN. And that's how it all started out. It was a quitclaim deed regarding property in Las Vegas. And all they needed was his signature. That would take care of it. And they were in Las Vegas, so they came out to the San Fernando Valley to visit David KAZDIN and ask him, please sign this quitclaim deed. We need it regarding this property in Las Vegas. Came out, they talked to him, and he said, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know about any property in Las Vegas. And he invites Kenny in. He has another friend with him. And they go in to talk to him, and he directs him back into the kitchen area. And again, we have this quitclaim deed. All we need is just your signature on here. And he says, no, I'm not going to sign it. I don't know what you're talking about. Well, at that point, Kenny didn't have any alternative. He takes a gun out, and he fires it. He shoots KAZDIN in the head, and KAZDIN falls down on the floor right there in front of you, dead. Well, the next thing they needed to do, how do we dispose of the body? So they decided to take KAZDIN's body out and put it in the trunk of his car. He had this Jaguar in the garage. They put it in there, and the idea was they were going to drive the Jaguar, KAZDIN's car, to the airport to make it look like he had left on a trip, and that's why he disappeared. So they get on the freeway up in the San Fernando Valley, come down the 405 freeway all the way to LAX, and there they need to find a dumpster where they can dump the body, and later they're going to need a place to dump the car. So this just gives you an idea. This is where they found an alleyway, and the car was parked in a parking lot a little further over, closer to the airport. Now, as I say, they drove down this alley looking for dumpsters. And here was a dumpster. It was pushed out because the trash was going to be picked up the next day. So they dumped the body, KAZDIN's body, in that dumpster. So the next morning, there were dumpster divers out looking for trash, recyclables, and somebody went through that trash bin. One of the men jumped inside it, and he was surprised when he pulled back one of the trash bags. There was a dead body. There was a man who was dead. So he jumped out, had the police come out, and the police came out, and they looked in there. Sure enough, there was a dead body in this trash. Now, who was he? He had no identification on him.
There was no wallet. There was nothing. We don't have any shell casings that are found. There's no blood at all. No evidence of drugs or gangs. So the detectives were kind of at a loss. What do we have? It wasn't until later in the day there were other dumpster divers, and they were working about 2 blocks away, and one of them went into this trash bin here, jumped in there, and he found a wallet with ID in it, credit cards. It was KAZDIN. And he called the police, gave it to the police. Now the police knew who the victim was. So when they did the autopsy, they did this x-ray, and you can see there's a slug in his head, KAZDIN's head, and that's what killed him. So it was 1 bullet to the head, and there was some slight bruising around the outside. All right, so now we know what caused his death. Now let's switch from Sante Kimes, who did the shooting, to his mother, Sante Kimes. Now, who was she, and what was her background? Well, she was born in 1943 and grew up in the Oklahoma area. Her parents, it was kind of a mismatch there, and she really grew up in foster homes and at one time in an orphanage. And it wasn't until in her teenage years that she was able to be adopted by a family that moved to Los Angeles. So when she got to Los Angeles, she finished her high school in 1952, and she married her sweetheart, and that didn't last. It lasted 3 months. And then she married another high school admirer, and they had a child, and that didn't work out either. So she wasn't very successful at her relationships or marriages. So how is she going to support herself? She has a young son. Well, she has a body, she's young, she's attractive, so she becomes a prostitute. And she works the streets of Los Angeles as a prostitute. She did that for a while, and fortunately for her, she met Kenneth Kimes Sr. And, he was older, and, she thought, well, this is a good catch. And so they hooked up, and they lived together for about 10 years and eventually got married. It was a great life for her. They had a nice home. They had a family. They had a son. Things couldn't be better for Sante Kimes. Well, who was he? Who was Kenneth Kimes Sr.? He was in the business of building motels across the United States. At that time, people were starting to travel. They needed motels. So they were building them everywhere. And he made millions from all of these motels that he built across the states. Now, what was life like with the two of them? Now, he's older, she's a little younger, and they had a wonderful life. But what they liked most of all was defrauding people. It wasn't the thrill of it. Why? They didn't need to. I mean, they were wealthy individuals. And just to give you an example, the fur coat scam, I call it, they were back at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, D.C. And they were in there, and she had her fur coat. And they all went into the ballroom there. And all the ladies at that time, they took their fur coat off, and they would lay down on a chair, and they would socialize or dance or whatever. What Sante did was she would take these fur coats and she would put them on top of her coat, and then she would leave. And the people didn't see him. They noticed that she was taking the coats, but she did it numerous times. And when the people noticed that their coats were missing, they asked around, and some said, well, there was a lady, she looks just like Elizabeth Taylor. And I saw her with some fur coats, and the hotel knew exactly who they were talking about. It was Sante Kimes, because she had the appearance, looked very similar to Elizabeth Taylor. So when the police went upstairs to their room, when they went into the room, what did they find? That both of them were cutting the labels out of all these fur coats on the bed. They must have had like a half dozen fur coats, and they took the label, the names of the owners. So this was their scam of taking the fur coats and then reselling them. Now there was another scam they did, which is remarkable. They went to the White House for a reception, and they had no difficulty talking their way in. They claimed they had an invitation to see President Ford, and they go right in there and they meet him. They shake hands with President Ford and his wife. They had a long conversation together. How in the world were they able to do that? But they enjoyed using people, defrauding people. And Sante Kimes decided, well, let's go down to Mexico. And she would go down to Mexico on various trips and pick up young Mexican girls and bring them back and have them work as domestics. And they did this many times. But when they brought them back, they would either try to sell them off, and they used them themselves, but they would never pay them. They never paid any of these workers who came back. They kept saying, well, you owe us, a certain amount of money until you pay that off. We're not going to allow you to leave. Well, it was a form of domestic worker slavery, and they finally got caught. 3 of the girls took off. They left. They were able to get out. They went to the police and told their story, and the police went out and they arrested them. The FBI got involved and they were prosecuted. And when it came to trial, these young ladies came into court. They testified. They were brought to the United States by Kimes, and they were never paid, never given any compensation for working for months, if not years. So Sante is convicted, goes to prison, but she learned something from this experience. And what she learned after serving the 3 years, that the idea is never allow any witness to survive, to be able to testify in court against you. So she learned something from that. So when she got out with her husband, they went back to scamming again, but it was a little different. Here they were taking houses that they owned, and they were setting them on fire and trying to collect, and did collect, on the fire insurance. In order to do all of that, they had to have an attorney, and they took their family attorney and used him to set all of this up and to put all the claims in against the fire insurance company. It worked out very well. They made a lot of money. However, after a while, they learned that their attorney had become an informant for the FBI, and that scared them. They realized they were going to go back to prison if he went to court and testified. So they were very nice, inviting their family attorney and said, we want to take you down to Costa Rica for a vacation, and they did. The attorney went with them down there, and the attorney was never heard from again. And since the attorney disappeared, the case disappeared, and the FBI had to terminate their investigation of all those fire, arson, insurance frauds. Now, as to the son, Kenny Kimes Jr., well, what about him? He was born in 1975 and didn't have much of a family life because his parents were very busy. If they weren't doing work, they were doing scams. And, of course, for a certain period of time, they both went to prison. So he was raised by his half-brother in the Hawaii area. Then he came back to the States, and he went to UC Santa Barbara and was doing well up there. And his mother came to live with him in Santa Barbara. So it was an interesting relationship. They lived together and slept together. Kind of an interesting arrangement. And by that time, he was getting involved in his mother's scams, the different businesses that she used to defraud people. Then all of a sudden in 1994, the father, Kenneth Kimes Sr., had a heart attack, and he died up in Santa Barbara. And Sante, wow, what is she going to do? Well, they thought they had everything worked out, but they didn't. His last will and testament was a long time ago. It had never been updated, and it left everything to his first family. Now, Sante was not going to get anything. She wasn't going to get any of those millions of dollars that Kenneth Sr. had. So what she did, talk about a scam, she told his first family, the children from his first family, that she, saw him leave. He went on a trip to Japan, and that's why he wasn't around. He was doing a business deal in Japan. So she was able to put him off for many, many months, claiming that he was really on a business trip. Now, as far as the mother-son team, well, they wanted to commit this fraud, the Las Vegas property. And how were they going to do it? Well, this is how they were going to do it. In Las Vegas, they had a piece of property that was in Sante's name and her husband's name. So it was right on the country club, right on the corner, a very nice home looking over the greens. So it was paid for, fully paid for. So what Sante did was she took that property and she went to a mortgage company and said, look, I want to mortgage my property that's free and clear. And they said, fine. And she took out this loan and she put it in the name of David KAZDIN. And that's where David KAZDIN gets involved. He had nothing to do with it. It was just that his name was being used. Now, they received $230,000 for that piece of property. So they were doing very well. Now, that's what we talked about. David KAZDIN didn't know anything about this, and the first thing he learned about was when he got a payment book from the mortgage company saying that he had to make these mortgage payments for the property in Las Vegas. So that's what got him interested in contacting the mortgage company. So, as I say, we already talked about Kenny had to get this quitclaim deed signed. It was very, very important. If they didn't get it signed and KAZDIN continued to go to the insurance company and the police, then the Kimes would be in a heap of trouble, and they didn't want to be in trouble with the law. Now, we're going to talk about a double fraud, and this is going to put another layer on the fraud that they were committing, and it's fraud on the insurance company. So what they did was, here's that property in Las Vegas, right on the country club, and they take out fire insurance for $500,000. So that was what they originally did. And of course, there was a fire that took place in their property. And they knew that it had to be a complete fire. Just a small fire wasn't going to give them the amount of money that they wanted, which was, $500,000. So you can see from the fire damage that it was substantial. It really was a major fire. Now they're getting some flack from the fire insurance company, and they think maybe it's time to leave town, get out of town. So the two of them decide to leave, and they leave in this RV. It's an old broken down RV that they had kept alive with baling wire. It was in very, very bad shape, but that's all they had, and they got in it and they drove off. Well, by the time they hit Louisiana, it wasn't making it. So they found a motorhome that was for sale, and the person was asking $83,000, pretty substantial amount. And Kenny went up and said, "Fine, we'll pay $83,000." There was no haggling, no negotiation. He said, "Hey, let me write a check for it." The owner was just tickled to death, not realizing that this was going to be a fraudulent check that was going to be written. So they get this new RV, and then they take off and they go down to Florida. And when they were down in Florida, they thought, well, let's see if we can defraud a bank. So there was a bank from the Bahamas, and they met the banker, and they talked to him. His name Ahmed, and they took out an account, a very, very small amount, and then they decided, well, we're going to have to get rid of him, and so they drowned him. They drowned him in their hotel room. It was a Hilton hotel. They drowned him, and then the idea was to get rid of the body. How are they going to get rid of the body? And this is, which was, as I call it, a close call for Kenny. What happened was, he has the body, and he's taking it out of the hotel, and he wants to take it out in the ocean and just dump it. So there's a rowboat right behind the hotel, so he's put the body in the rowboat, and he's starting to row out, and it gets stuck on a sandbar. It just stuck there, and it won't go. And all of a sudden, some police officers come by, and they say, well, hey, can we help you? And Kenny says, yeah, okay. And they help push him off. They push him off the sandbar, and he takes off. He escapes with the dead body, and when he got out there, quite some distance, he threw the body overboard with an anchor on it, and that was the end of that banker. Now, they wanted to do the scam of all scam in New York. And so they've gotten this Lincoln Town car. They got it through bad checks. It was all fraudulent. So they head up to New York. And what were they going to do? Well, here you can see from Sante's calendar, she has this written down, 200 East 65th Street, Irene Silverman. So this is where they're headed, up there to this brownstone. It's an apartment or complex, like a hotel. And there it is. It is run by Irene Silverman, an older lady who had quite a background. She was the socialite of New York at the time. She started out as a ballerina, and she was very good as a ballerina. And she met a New York banker, and they hit it off. He was older, but he had a lot of money. And she lived with him for, many years. And eventually they got married. And she lived the good life. And one of the buildings that he owned was this brownstone. It was a very large hotel complex. And it was their home at the time. Very, very well furnished. And when he passed away, she wanted, to continue to live in that brownstone. And she would have people come in and rent the rooms for $6,000 per month. Very nice. They had butlers, they had chefs, they had maids, and they were well taken care of. Now, she was a very astute businesswoman, and she would not allow anybody to live in her so-called luxury hotel without references. They had to give her references, and she always did it, required it. Now, what happened was Kenny contacted her saying that he wanted to rent a room. And, she said, okay, come on by. And she talked to him, and she said, okay, I need your references. And he said, I don't have them with me today. You know, I just want to get established here. I want a place to stay. I don't have any, and then he plunks down $6,000 in cash. And for some reason, the business lady, Irene Silverman, saw the cash and she said, okay, get me your references in 2 days and that will be fine. She takes the cash and allows him to move in. Well, he moved in. This was the room that he lived in. And then after several days, she keeps asking, we have those paperwork, and he said, oh, they're in the mail. They're in the mail. They'll be here soon. But then she noticed that there was a lady, an older lady, that was staying with him. And they never left their room together. She got very suspicious. Irene thought something was fishy here, and she took all this information down about him. And she kind of thought maybe he was a drug dealer or something. So what happened was, I think it was July 4th, they invited her into their room where he was staying, and Sante had a little electronic things that stunned her. It was a stun gun, and then Kenny strangled her to death. Now the question was, how do they dispose of her body? They're in New York, so they have that town car. They take her down, and they put her in the trunk of the town car. And where do they go? Where would you from New York go to get rid of a body? You go to New Jersey. So they went through the Lincoln Tunnel, they went to New Jersey, and they looked for some swamp land over there. And that's what happened to Irene Silverman. Her body was never found. She was a missing person. What happened to her? Where did she go? Well, the plans were the Kimes were going to take that Brownstone luxury hotel that she ran, and they were going to have a friend from California come out, and he was going to run it for them. They were going to take over that hotel and claim that they were the new management. They were owning it, and they were running it. And they had it all figured out, and they had all the documents that they needed. So they were to meet at a Hilton hotel with this friend that was going to run it for them. What they didn't know was that friend got in some trouble out on the West Coast, and he became an FBI informant. So he had supplied quite a bit of information to him, and he now was with the FBI, and the FBI knew that they were in this hotel, and they chased him down, and they arrested him. So Sante and Kenny were arrested, and what was found? Well, on their person, when they searched them, Irene's keys, Irene's passport, her checkbook, her Social Security, everything. And that was all a big surprise to the FBI because they didn't know anything about her being missing and certainly being dead. Now they checked it out and they found out that Irene Silverman was a missing person. When they checked out their car, that Lincoln town car, it was full of all sorts of evidence indicating that they were going to take care of Irene Silverman, and they were going to have a power of attorney and be able to claim that they were the new owners of that hotel. So all the evidence was found, and there was a New York case that was filed against them. And what was their defense? Their defense was no body, no case. The police, the FBI, no one ever found Irene Silverman's body. They did such a good job getting rid of her body in New Jersey. So they went to trial, and she was found guilty in prison. And her comment at the end of the trial in New York says, "Does that end it all? Is it over?" And she was hoping that would be over, but it wasn't. What happened was that Kenny was being interviewed by a journalist, and he liked to talk to journalists. He liked to, tell stories, and the journalists liked to get his interviews. But then all of a sudden, in the middle of an interview, he grabbed a pin and stuck it up against the neck of the female journalist and said he was going to kill her if he didn't get his way. He wanted to be out of solitary confinement. He had been in solitary for many weeks, and he wanted out, and this is the way he did it. And it resulted in an agreement. He said, okay, you get me out of solitary, and I will testify against my mother. And he did. He testified against his mother, and we bring him back to California, to Los Angeles, for the KAZDIN killing. And she's extradited, as well as Kenny. They come back, and Kenny is looking at the death penalty, and he doesn't want the death penalty for the killing of KAZDIN. Then he agrees, just like he did in New York, that he would testify against his mother. Very interesting how close they were as mother and son, but when it came to saving his life, he was willing to turn on his mother. So the trial in Los Angeles, I remember when it went on. I did some work on it with the exhibits, and it went on for a long time. And Sante would get up there, and she would testify, and then she would want to tell the jury other things, and it went on and on. And finally, she was convicted of the case in California, just like the case in New York, and she received prison time. Same thing with Kenny. He was convicted here, but we used him as a witness against his mother. Well, just to bring you up to date on that property in Las Vegas, that was the crux of this whole investigation, was that they were trying to get a quitclaim deed signed on this property, and there's that property. It got burnt down. You can see the foundation is still there, and all these years later, here's my wife, we're out there, there's the property, it's still for sale. It says at a reduced price, but there is that property right on the corner of the golf course. So if you're interested, it's available. Well, hopefully you found this podcast on the Kimes, the mother and son. If you want more details about the case, I have 2 books I've written on it, The Dumpster Diver Horror, and the print copy is The Prosecutrix. So I lay out all the facts as well as the jury trial. Now, hopefully you will join us again with another True Crime Files podcast by Ronald E. Bowers. See you then.